So I'm here today with my friend Tyler, who I've come to know through a unique series of historical accidents. And this is Darren Stevenson. I'm really excited to have a chance to talk with Tyler one-on-one. It's the first time we've had this kind of conversation or this opportunity. Our previous contacts have been through email and on the Extinction A meetings. So yeah, Tyler, I'm so glad to have you here today. Really excited to have a chance to talk together.
Yeah, likewise.
So I'm curious. I'd like to know more about how we came to know each other, because I think there's a backstory here that possibly I don't even know, that might involve you somehow becoming aware of my work. So yeah, tell me anything you've got. How did you come to be aware of me?
I discovered your channel at some point about 2 years ago, and I shared your information or your channel with the Extinction A. At some point, they contacted you, and then I was informed of their involvement with you last summer. Yeah.
I see. Yeah, I remember them reaching out to me, and there's a rather strange backstory there where. So Sophie reaches out to me and mentions both the Jejune Institute, which I was the alpha initiate of. I was the first person on that scene. And then apparently in your desiderata by Hugh, there's a segment where there's a bunch of glyphs. And those glyphs come from an anomalous situation in 2007 in the San Francisco Bay Area that was later known as the CARET, C-A-R-E-T drone, or the Isaac/CARET drone. And those glyphs, I was the first person to make a chart of all of the glyphs and build the forms that a font could be generated from. I didn't actually generate that font, but my work was probably involved in generating that font. So I thought that was a really unique set of coincidences. I wasn't clear whether or not someone in the Extinction A was aware of my involvement with the Jejune Institute or not, but so yeah, then I reached out to them. A few weeks passed, and I ended up in a meeting. But you and I didn't. I don't think I heard your voice until maybe 6 or 7 months ago. I could be wrong about that. What's your recollection?
We met around Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was my first encounter.
Yeah. And please continue.
Well, until then, I had only been watching the Extinction A meetings. So I only became a direct participant around that time.
Oh, I see. So you had not been directly participating in the Extinction A meetings until that time, is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And was my showing up in some way catalytic?
Yeah, once I realized that you were a member of the group, I wanted to participate.
Yeah, I remember the first time so one of the reasons we're having this conversation is that I've been reading Tyler's posts to the group, which are private. They're in the, they're sort of in the email chat. And there is a Reddit channel, but it's not particularly active. And a few months ago, we began to play with the idea of doing what we refer to as missions, which are really experiments. And Tyler had proposed a mission involving Goethe's, how shall I put this, Goethe's theories about light and the spectrum, utilizing prisms, and I participated in that experiment. But I just remember, like, the first few times I heard you speak, I was pretty shocked at the breadth and depth of your intellect, your curiosity, your passion, your capacity to resist what we might call prevalent biases in science and physics. And I kind of heard this other, not sure what to call it, an undertone, a kind of urgency in your pursuit of understanding, awareness, and particularly insight. And so that's how we got here today. The last conversation that I was involved with you, you were really just blowing my mind. And I've been around. It's pretty difficult to surprise me, but you don't seem to have too much trouble doing that. And I'm totally hoping that some of that might be going on today. So yeah, I was just really enthusiastic about getting your voice out into the world, and also just having some open conversations outside the purview of the Extinction Oddity. So yeah, really excited about this chance to begin that process today, and hopefully this will just be a sort of introduction to future discussions and elucidations. All right, so I do have some questions for you. I'd like you, if you're willing to share anything about your childhood and your education that you think might have led you, that might have been important in your development, that led you to the pursuit of awareness and insight and understanding. And in case that's not specific enough, particularly anything that was highly motivating, or anything that was troubling in such a way that it set you on a quest. And of course, since this is public, obviously you don't want to share everything that's personal, but anything you might want to share about that would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was a child, I was motivated to engage in certain kinds of ritualistic behaviors, which I think tied into my later intellectual pursuits. Um, when I was a child, I was interested in how my breath interacted with my environment, and I became fixated on how my motion through space affected the course of history, in a more general sense, a very vague sense. Um, and through that kind of meditation or concentration, um, I found myself almost entranced. I could enter certain kinds of like hypnotic states, um, which I found extremely enthralling and invigorating. Those sensations, I think, were like obsessions, or um, almost like narcotics. I became addicted to this feeling of um, being ejected from historical time in a certain sense. And as I grew up, as my mind developed, those initially physiological fixations became much more linguistic or intellectual. So today, I almost exclusively read aloud to myself. I need to feel the reverberation of my voice in my throat in order to absorb the information that I, you know, uh, conjure up. so, so even today, my intellectual activity is still somewhat rooted in this more primitive, physiological experience that I had when I was a child. So I find that interesting. Like I can notice that about myself. Um, this
It's
kind of
very profound. I'm sorry, please continue.
just this kind of progressive transformation of like this initially kinesthetic experience into a linguistic or intellectual experience. That transformation characterized my development, I think, as a person. Um, so I can mention that. And something about that is obviously magical or um, even esoteric. Yeah.
I notice immediately, so there's a few things that are very clear to me. One is that when you speak, your voice is very compelling. Your vocal music is consistent, rich. There is a sense of it being controlled. Um, I'm not sure exactly what I mean by that, but
Right. Yeah.
you don't range over a broad array of tones.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sort of intentional focus in a specific, I think the word is timbre.
Mm-hmm.
And your speech is also the cadence is consistent, and it's compelling without being what's the right word? It's compelling without using volume or transitions in tone to achieve the momentum, or the transfer of energy is actually a clearer way of saying that. And I was impressed by that immediately when I first heard you speak, because I tend to be sensitive to vocal music and people's vocal rhythms and cadences, and the whole range of their vocal behavior. And yours is quite peculiar and fairly like it's intensely effective, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, this is also generally how I read to myself. I try to maintain this kind of consistent cadence. I find myself conscious of my breathing, the way that my breath moves through my mouth, um, the pressure that my tongue exerts on, you know, the roof of my mouth, and so on.
These are features of somatic experience that are often remarked upon in specific traditions of meditation, which I suspect you are aware of, like Hindu meditations, meditation in Advaita Vedanta. There's careful awareness of breath, specific places in the body where the breath can be felt, particularly at the openings of the nostrils, back of the throat, top of the mouth. You know, one of the things that I'm reminded of by what you were just sharing, which I think is super, I mean, it's extremely fascinating, and I have a lot more questions about it, is that we are now in our modern time, we're starting to hear a lot of very skillful and experienced people talking about somatic intelligences, right? Like the visceral senses of being human and the nonverbal aspects of our human intelligence. And when you describe your experience as a child, which must have been extremely confusing for your parents, and we're going to get to that in a moment, I'm reminded of somebody who is born with an intense connection to the somatic and visceral intelligences of your body, and linking these to your intellect, your awareness, um, and your motivations. Right? So I'd love to hear anything you'd like to, like if you'd like to give us a little picture of something that might have happened in your room when you were not being observed by others and you were playing or practicing with these faculties. What would it be like? What did you experience, and what might someone else observe?
Mm-hmm. Um, so I found myself typically observing some scene in my room, concentrating on the arrangement of the objects um, in relation to my own body and its movement. Um, I would feel this kind of energy accumulate in my body, like a certain kind of tension, and I would kind of retain that tension as long as possible, or to the most optimal point, for it to be released. So this kind of release of energy felt like a form of chaos or a certain kind of explosion. So I would often like explosively like move my hand in a certain direction. Um, I would feel myself overcome by this kind of involuntary purely physical process, almost like an automaton. Um, I would simply observe my own movement through space, almost like a work of art. So I almost externalized my motion, becoming a kind of second observer through this kind of process of becoming entranced, if that makes any sense. So I guess it looked like a certain kind of vacillation between stillness and an explosion. Um, so these kinds of violent, explosive, chaotic movements uh, would preoccupy me if I was just kind of sitting by myself in my room. Even something like a pencil on the desk, I would concentrate on the pencil, study its position in space, and through my breathing, I could accumulate this certain kind of tension or energy in my chest or in my body as a whole, which I would then release in this kind of sudden, spontaneous motion. And then I would observe how the object moved in response to that kind of release of tension. And that observation brought me this kind of sense of fulfillment or satisfaction. Um, I felt like I was observing some like purely physical process by turning myself into an automaton or something. Yeah, and that sounds kind of bizarre, but uh, I can characterize it like that.
It may just be very difficult to describe in ordinary language. Whether or not it sounds bizarre isn't isn't so much the issue. But I want to understand a little better. Suppose you're looking at the pencil, you feel the buildup of the energy, you focus it in a sense, you hold on to it for a moment, you build it, and then you express it with sudden movement. Uh, what what then would change about the pencil's location in space? Would you be touching the pencil? Tell me more.
I felt like I was canceling any kind of prior historical influence that I may have exerted on the pencil. So I was effectively like undoing or annulling certain influences in time that may have issued from some other kind of cognitive state, uh, which I regarded as less than ideal or less than beautiful. Um, so I was engendering something like beauty. It was I mentioned a work of art. So I was basically turning my body into a work of art that could cancel historical um, contingencies or um, rough spots. Yeah. So there was a very clear distinction in my experience between the sacred and the profane.
Mm.
So in order to enter into this sacred state of consciousness or this kind of sacred space, I needed to accumulate this energy for it to be released. Um, and that release was always quite fleeting. It was this fleeting sense of dwelling in the right state of consciousness. Um, the state of consciousness in which I could undo certain historical mistakes. Um, living in profane time, in other words.
Mhm.
you know, because
What
when I
was the? Oh, go ahead.
when I interact with objects in profane space, I tend to use objects as these utilitarian artifacts or tools. I make use of them without fully understanding them,
Wow.
and that meditative state, I think, was capable of undoing some of those influences because I felt like I was actively maybe changing or influencing the state of this object. Yeah.
I'm reminded of the concept of sin, not necessarily in the religious tradition, but in the philosophic tradition, as of having misacted somehow or misappropriated being or misunderstood relationships, and the possibility of rectification, of unsinning.
Yes. Right.
Okay. Um, and so where is the space? It seems as if you may be saying that the space in which the problem existed as you experienced it then, and I'm not sure if you still experience it this way because we're speaking of your childhood, but is that space temporality, or is it both temporality and actual physical space, or is there a third thing involved? How would you characterize it?
I would characterize it as preeminently temporal. Yeah.
Hmm. So it's as if there's a problem in time, and
Yeah.
perhaps it's a relational problem.
Yes.
Mhm. In other words, the pre-orientation of relational activity creates something that must be resolved.
I
And
think I
feel
was,
free to correct that, like, yeah, whatever.
yeah, I think I was really struggling with chronological time. I was
Mm,
struggling with history. So even when I was younger, my sense was that I was ejecting myself from history by entering into these states of consciousness.
mhm,
Even then, I understand what I was doing more clearly now, but yeah, that
mhm.
I think that would be worth mentioning.
That's astonishingly profound. Um, I suspect there are others who would not merely understand what you're trying to communicate here, but would have had some experience of something very similar themselves. Um, have you ever encountered any people who did?
I don't think so.
Okay. And how did your parents respond to this situation? And give us some idea of, you know, your age at which this started to become perhaps in some way obvious and or something that had to be addressed somehow.
Yeah, I think it manifested between the ages of 10 and 16.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, my parents were concerned um, because I needed to go through these rituals constantly, even in the context of seemingly mundane everyday tasks, um,
Mm.
like the clothing that I would wear. Right. I was extremely conscious of the way that my clothing was interacting with my body.
Hmm.
So my mom quickly realized what was going on at some level, and she became concerned.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, there's probably no way for your parents, regardless of how enlightened or unenlightened they may have been, to have understood what your experience, from whence your experience was originating, what your experience was actually like. And I'm guessing, did you ever attempt to explain any of this to them? Did you feel you were capable of explaining? How did you feel?
I could describe some of the qualities of my experience, um, but I had no theory of what I was experiencing or coherent description,
Mhm.
as I do now, I think, to some extent.
And so what happened? Were you psychologized, medicated? What took place?
I received therapy for it and I was medicated, yes. I was
Yeah.
diagnosed with OCD and I was given
Uh-huh.
all sorts of medicines.
I
Um,
see.
yeah.
And how do you feel now about what happened in that process?
I think, well, something about it is unfortunate, um, but I think it makes sense. You know, my parents only wanted the best for me and they were trying to look out for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, you know, I was troubled by what I was experiencing at some level. Um, it was an all-consuming preoccupation, which detracted from other aspects of my life. But those currents are still in my psychology, as I mentioned. So today, when I read a book, for example, I treat the book similarly to the way that I used to treat all other objects. So now, it almost I can almost characterize this as if what I used to experience for every object has been subordinated or sublimated to a specific class of objects, uh,
Mm.
and my way of relating to those objects.
And that specific class is books.
Yeah, literature. Yeah,
Uh-huh. And is that a relief?
in a certain respect, I suppose. Yeah, I think
Because
it
it
benefits me.
does it does seem to be very demanding if all objects have to be treated in a similar fashion.
Right, exactly.
Because then essentially you have to unbind from historical time and relation any object upon which your attention that comes into your attention, I suspect.
Right, and the trance is impossible to maintain indefinitely anyway.
Ah,
So it helps to have a specific class of object through which you
yes.
can enter the hypnotic state.
Uh-huh. This is very profound. Have you ever actually experienced hypnosis? Have you been hypnotized by someone else?
I haven't.
Hmm.
Um,
Are
I
you
read
capable
about,
of?
sorry?
Go ahead, please.
Well, I read about hypnosis initially in the context of Jacques Vallée's works, and he convinced me that hypnosis tends not to add significant data to, paranormal percipients. So um, I took his word for it, and I haven't received hypnosis or um, formally.
Hmm.
Although in my view, I just tend to hypnotize myself.
Hmm.
I do it fairly regularly.
Are you able to generate trance at will?
Yeah, it takes effort,
Okay.
but I think I can do it.
Uh-huh. Um, yeah, I'm just curious about these matters because I'm extremely fascinated by the features of human experience, awareness, and behavior that are collected under this rubric. Um, I've had some experience with them myself. Some of that experience I find very surprising. I'm still trying to understand something that resembles. So, one of the topics that fascinates me, this won't be a long lecture, but is the historical arcs that led to the kinds of minds and common mental experience that we have today. We might think of this as the origins of consciousness. And so I'm very curious what historical, developmental um, situations led to the possibility of what we would call hypnosis, where effectively, it seems, um, some human being either gives to another human being the authorization to direct their consciousness, or the other human being effectively, this is probably the wrong word, but enchants the subject. Uh, and I find this very fascinating. I find its implications about the nature of consciousness and identity quite provocative because it violates a lot of what we would ordinarily think about, what we would commonly think about the nature of personality, identity, and consciousness. Does that make much sense?
Yes, it does.
So these are some of the reasons why I'm very curious about that. I've begun a conversation with Lee Gerard Barlow, who is a mesmerist. There are very, very few of these folks around. These are
Right.
people who can produce trance non-verbally, sometimes instantaneously. I'm looking forward to continuing that conversation, but we can return back to what was going on here. So, about what age did you begin to receive therapy and/or medication?
I must have been in my early teens. Yeah,
Mhm.
13, 14.
And there's so much more that we're going to get to here, but I do want to know a bit about your history, and I want the listeners to hear some of your experience of this because many of the unusually minded people I know have been tormented by medication. Um, and do you feel comfortable saying what medications you were subjected to or were given to you?
I don't even remember. Uh,
Hmm. Are we
at some
talking
point, I
things like
took
Adderall
Zoloft.
or
At another
Ritalin?
point, I took Ritalin.
Oh, huh.
I was hospitalized at one point because I was depressed.
Hmm.
Um, I don't remember.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. It's probably, maybe it's even better that you don't remember. Who knows? And then at what point did that taper off?
The obsessions or
No, the medication and the therapy.
medication. I stopped taking medication around the age of 18 or 19.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a
And
deliberate choice. I chose to stop.
was it challenging? What did you experience?
Well, medication helped me do well in school.
Hmm.
Gave me a lot of energy. It was like cappuccino every morning, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, Made me want to be busy. So I think that was really the function of the medication in the first place. It allowed me to withstand the tedium of schooling. That was really the
Uh-huh.
function that it served.
Yeah,
So
basically just give the kids methamphetamine and they will, toe the line of the ridiculous, mostly ridiculous um, subjugation that they're going to experience in the classroom.
right, right.
Hmm.
And as a kid, I wanted to do well in school, and I wanted to
Of
make my
course.
parents proud. So yeah, it served its purpose.
Mhm.
And then after a certain point, it failed to serve any purpose whatsoever. So
So was the process of coming off the medication challenging? And, how did your parents respond? How did the authorities respond?
they were supportive, I think.
Hmm. Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the medication never synergized well with my way of thinking. So I found myself feeling like a zombie or feeling depressed here and there, and yeah, I just felt like I was in prison.
Mm, I hear you, man.
Hmm.
Um, I want to start to turn the conversation toward your interest and experience of the non-ordinary, but without dismissing what you shared about your childhood and your fascinations and your way of being in consciousness, which was certainly very different from probably almost everyone around you. So, were you able to have friends? Did you play with other children? Tell me a little bit about your social uh,
Oh yeah, I mean, I
history.
always had a few friends,
Mm.
um, typically two at a time.
Hmm.
I had two friends at a time. Yeah.
That's similar to my experience, actually. Yeah,
Hmm.
I have two very close friends, one or two. And even this, the teachers at school were like, I think something's wrong with Darren. They're like, why is it? Well, he only plays with one child. My parents were like, yeah, and what's the problem? Um, which wasn't actually entirely true. I mean, for myself, I was friendly with a broad spectrum of children in elementary school, but I would only have one or two close friends.
Hmm. Right.
I liked the other children generally and enjoyed. I think I mostly enjoyed their esteem. So, but I wasn't particularly what do they call it, extroverted.
Oh, I see.
Um,
Yeah, me
well,
neither.
that's so. Did you engage in play with other children, toys and things?
I think so. Yeah, I think
Hmm.
so. Um, in preschool, I can remember playing with other children. Yeah.
And what about toys in general in childhood?
Um, well, I used to enjoy making these picturesque scenes with my toys,
Hmm.
which I think I mentioned previously. Um, I would arrange my toys in these kinds of sets, like crystalline images that I could meditate on. Really, I was meditating on these scenes, essentially, with these
Uh-huh.
toys. I would position them carefully and bask in those kinds of relations. Yeah, I think I was experiencing a certain kind of satisfaction from that.
The interesting implication of what you're saying here is that, and this is my own perspective, and I'll take responsibility for it. And again, with anything that I may, offer in the conversation, please don't hesitate to correct me or modify, improve what I may have said. But it seems to me that you're occupying a kind of a transcendental position that isn't really in ordinary reality or what regular humans experience at all.
And what do you mean by transcendental?
um, So when you talk about the scenes that you would compose and their impact on, or how you related with them, their impact on your consciousness or your awareness, this is a very extraordinary, it seems to me, mode of relation with both the potential of toys, right? Because what we might think of as regular children, right? They would take the dinosaur and they would imagine it being an actual dinosaur, perhaps, and maybe the worm would turn into the Jurassic world, and they would, march it around and maybe fight other dinosaurs, or jet airplanes would come in and there'd be Godzilla battles in their imagination. My imagination when I was in childhood was very profound, and the universe would transform around us, like, for example, just playing with a stick or some dirt. Somehow there was this, you've seen it cartoonized in cartoons like Calvin and Hobbes, where he, is playing with toys and he's sort of in an imaginary world with monsters, and, he's kind of a godlike figure in the world, which I was too in my imaginings, although the idea of gods wasn't a thing really in childhood. It was more this perspective of the one who makes the world. And perhaps this is a way in which all play of children is transcendental. Because it's not as if they necessarily imagine themselves to be gods, but there might be a natural meta position over where, okay, they don't merely see what's in front of them, right? And so your unique way of not merely seeing what's in front of you is transcendental, I think, to what ordinary children, if there are such things, usually do when they play. Did you ever play with toys in the way that other children played with them, even with other children?
Occasionally, yeah, I think so.
Okay. Excellent.
With action figures and that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
I mean, who knows what kinds of toys you had? I had Hot Wheels, model aircraft, I had a menagerie of animals and monsters and things. I had Legos.
Mm-hmm.
What else? I had books. I had, we could make blanket forts and all kinds of stuff like that. Mad Hot Wheel cities. We used to build insane things out of Legos. But that was, all through my childhood, probably from 4 or 5 when I began to play with toys, up until maybe 12 when that world began to collapse more or less intensely. We're told that we grow out of our imaginal play and so on, and I don't really think that's the case. I think something else is going on, but I'll leave that aside for the moment. So did you have any unusual or paranormal experiences as a kid with, say, oh, by the way, what do you recall of your dreaming as a child? Anything?
I recall, snapshots.
Uh-huh.
Nothing about my dreaming ever startled me or felt particularly abnormal.
Mm-hmm.
My experience with, the paranormal, I think, was fairly visceral. Yeah.
Say more.
Oh, well, I underwent this series of experiences when I was 15 that transformed the way that I think about the world and catalyzed my interest in philosophy. And um, the nature of science and human history. Um, so yeah, I had this series of UFO experiences that deeply, you know, disturbed me initially because everything about the world that I thought was coherent was undermined, and I was forced to think critically for myself about what the world could possibly be if such a thing could happen to me. Um,
Mm.
yeah.
Okay, so let's hear the history in sequence of these experiences.
So the first experience took place in March of 2009. I was living in Connecticut at the time, and um, I went for a walk with my dog one morning, as I usually did. I used to love to walk my dog through the woods. There was a wooded area near the house where I used to take him after school. But in the morning, I would take him down the street just to the stop sign and back. And yeah, this one morning, as I was walking him, I saw this object in the distance that suddenly flew vertically and made this kind of noise. It was like the sound of rushing air or wind, but it sounded mechanical. It sounded like almost like a vacuum cleaner or a hair dryer. The sound of air being pushed through some kind of mechanical device.
Mm.
And yeah, I watched this object fly vertically, and I was scared, so I ran back to the house. And as I stood in the front lawn, I watched it fly toward me, and it flew directly overhead as the sun was rising. So I was able to see its shape and its color. Um, it was a triangular object. It had three lights on it. Um, these lights were white, but they were about the size of stars in the night sky. They were pinpoints of light that appeared to be extending beyond the surface of the object, almost like small bulbs or Christmas lights, um,
Mm.
instead of being embedded in the structure of the object, which I found interesting. Um, in the center of the object, there was this red light that appeared to be almost inset or inlaid, um, as if it was sunken into the structure of the object. The surface of the object itself appeared to be leathery. It had a kind of mesh around it,
Mm.
um, and it flew directly overhead. It was within maybe 100 feet, and it flew slowly, making this mechanical noise. And I watched it disappear over the horizon. It was like it was flying at treetop level.
Mm.
Um, and so,
Did your pet respond?
I wasn't actually looking at him at the time, so
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what he was
Okay,
doing.
I
But he
gotcha.
stayed with me. He was a pretty good dog. He
Uh-huh.
he always stayed by my side. But I was looking up. I was looking at overhead.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Um, so what I found curious about that experience was that the object either was surprised by my presence, um, but in general, it flew in my direction, which I always found somewhat curious.
Uh-huh.
So it appeared to be startled by my appearance, and then it turned to fly directly overhead. So I got a very good look at it. And
You
it was actually
ran.
in broad daylight.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So that was the
Yeah.
first experience
It's
that I had.
okay, so it's pretty hard to um, suppose that either A, you were having an imaginary experience. Uh, I'm aware of the capacity for humans to have hallucinations. Many of us have experienced them. We've experienced liminal states of consciousness and so forth, perhaps before sleeping or after sleeping. But what you're describing sounds like an everyday occurrence happening in broad daylight,
Exactly.
when you're walking your dog, even though you are someone who has experienced trance, there's no indication that you're in trance here, is there?
No,
Yeah. And so you saw it seemed to approach you, and then you fled, or correct that for me.
I fled as soon as I saw it fly vertically because I was startled. So
Hmm.
I watched it for a few seconds, and then I went back to my front yard.
Could you still see it at that point?
Yep, I was basically running backwards, so I ran to the front yard, looking behind myself as I ran.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
Initially, I thought it was some kind of military aircraft, so I was very confused
Right.
about what was going
Right.
on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because the problem here is that if the tree of categories can be violated, that draws into question the entire tree, right? So if we see something or if we have an experience as a human being that doesn't fit into the categories that we have, even if we have the category, UFO or whatever, right? If we have this kind of experience, the problem is that it draws the whole category tree into question. Because now we don't know what the universe is anymore. We're not sure what the universe is. We don't know what the world is. We're not sure what the sky is
Right. Yes.
because it fundamentally it performs what I would call, humans can do this theoretically and in religions. It performs what I call an attack on the supercontainer, which means that all the thing that all other concepts depend upon for their validation is drawn into question. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And so you had this experience at 15. You ran to your porch. What happened next?
I just watched it fly overhead, and I continued to watch it until it disappeared.
Uh-huh.
So I saw it disappear over the trees.
And were the lights continuous? Did they flash? How was the lighting situation?
Yeah, the lights were continuous. They were
Uh-huh.
steady pinpoints of light. The red light seemed much more ambient, more vague,
Mm-hmm.
but the white lights on each corner were sharply defined. Yeah, they seemed to be almost like exhaust or some kind of. They appeared not to have a solid boundary, like you would imagine
Mm-hmm.
a glass bulb.
Right.
They literally looked like stars,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, distending from the side
I
of the earth.
follow.
Yeah.
Was the shape an elongated triangle, or was it exactly? I guess I don't know what the geometric term is. It
Uh,
is.
yeah,
Go ahead.
it was an equilateral triangle.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's
So
perfect.
each exactly. Yeah. Great. Okay. So what happened after that?
I ran inside. I told my parents. I think they were still asleep. I think it was around 6:20 a.m.
Hmm.
So my parents were still in bed, um, and they didn't hear anything or see anything. So I went to school that day feeling really energized and baffled, obviously. And I think I may have told one of my teachers that I experienced this UFO or something. um, I looked it up on my computer and I realized that other people had seen something like that before. Um,
Mm.
and I was always generally curious about UFOs, as a child. Um, I would see, documentaries on the History Channel growing up. Um, so I knew where to look roughly for, information. So I found MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network.
Mm-hmm.
And through their database, I discovered that other people had experienced something similar. So I submitted my own report,
Mm.
and I was eager to speak to some of these MUFON field investigators because I imagine that they must really know what's going on. Maybe they have connections or they can help me understand. So that happened sometime later, but um,
I take it you were quite disappointed in that goal.
I wasn't disappointed. But I realized that. Well, I eventually realized that MUFON is less than scientifically reputable. So,
Mm.
I subscribed to their magazine for about a year, and um, I just found their interpretation of this phenomenon to be rather maybe archaic or one-dimensional. Their emphasis on extraterrestrials and so on. Now I totally reject for the most part. Um,
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah, but I mean, that day I just felt energized and excited because my world had been profoundly, yeah, I guess, transformed or punctured. My bubble was punctured. So I felt energized that day.
Mm-hmm.
10 days later, I experienced another encounter with something very similar. Uh,
Hmm.
Around 11:30 p.m. on March 29th, 2009, I was in bed trying to go to sleep, and I heard this sound outside. It was like a rumbling sound of, some kind. So I leapt out of bed and I ran to the bedroom window and I sort of opened the blinds and I saw this massive object fly directly over the house from behind me, and it hovered over the front lawn. It basically stopped in midair and it turned about its axis 90 degrees and flew to the left, slowly gliding as it flew. Um, it was a dark black triangular object with these massive white floodlights. They looked like portholes. I could almost see into the object through these these floodlights or portholes. And this object appeared to be black in color, and it was a lot larger than the first one. This object was about the size of my house, and it was a fairly large house. It was in a suburban area. Um, so I ran outside, and as soon as I emerged, I didn't see it. I didn't see anything. But I did watch it disappear through my bedroom window. And as soon as it disappeared, I ran outside. And I don't remember, seeing anything. So, so that was only 10 days later. So I was sort of in this, I was swept away by these feelings of excitement. And, I became obsessed with like seeing it again. Yeah. I was sort of troubled by it. Yeah.
Did you suspect that? How did you think of the phenomenon? For example, did you fit it into some category that might be familiar to us? Like, did you think that is a spacecraft, that is a multidimensional vehicle, there are beings in there, or what? Did you have any thoughts about what the character of the phenomena was?
I never developed a theory of what happened. Um, until much later when I started to investigate the writings of Jacques Vallée and others.
Hmm.
Initially, I was prone to, the mainstream theories about aliens and, what you might find on the History Channel. I mean, I was only 15 years old, so
Sure.
I saw this old man on the History Channel making these declarations, and he seemed legitimate. But yeah, as I grew up, I tried to reconcile my experience with what I knew about the world, and I was struggling to make things add up in my mind. Um, so it caused me to reevaluate more basic assumptions about, what we think the world really is, or what human history is, or what our scientific concepts are. The nature of science. How could such a thing elude modern science? Is that even possible?
Right.
How could a child somehow discover, these cosmic secrets or these cosmic phenomena which physicists on television proclaim, are impossible, like, um,
Right.
or unlikely, or you
Yeah.
know, the
Yeah, the
product of mass
conflict,
hysteria, or, whatnot.
exactly, the conflict between what we might call, I'm going to try to say useful things here without getting too um, hyper articulate, but the conflict between consensus ontologies, scientific ontologies, and interior ontologies. And there's probably a fourth, dimension there that I didn't name, which you're welcome to opine on if you care to.
Yeah, scientific ontology makes a lot of sense to me. Every science presupposes some kind of ontology. So uprooting those ontological assumptions or presuppositions um, became something that really preoccupied my attention philosophically.
Hmm.
Um, I just want to mention that what troubled me the most was that in both cases I was presumably or seemingly approached by this form of technology or intelligence. I could never reconcile that with any kind of conspiratorial approach to human history. Um, I struggle to do that when I think critically about my memory of what happened. I just always come up short. Um, for some reason, these objects were either drawn to me directly or were impelled to single me out for investigation or, but whenever I run down these kinds of conspiratorial, uh, hypotheses or
Give us
theories.
an example. Give us an example of such a conspiratorial hypothesis, please.
Well, the question is, what about a 15-year-old child would be so interesting to someone with the capacity to build a machine like that? I mean, and you can imagine all sorts of scenarios where someone like that exists, or you can imagine what their motivations might be. Um, but the challenge is to square that with a coherent picture of the world, as at least I understand it. Um, but I always leave myself open to these possibilities as I continue to learn more. Um, I try to remain open, right?
I mean, there are some kind of obvious responses to that question, but before you know, before I say much more about that, I want to mention a couple things just for people who are listening, and feel free to correct me or, as always, right, in our conversation. So, ontology, the simple way to think about what is meant by this word is what is stuff? What is stuff? Epistemology is how do we know? How can we tell what stuff is or might be or what's meaningful or what's going on? And then teleology is sort of like purpose, I think, or perhaps you could provide a simple idea for what teleology is.
Yeah, I think teleology is influence from the future affecting the present.
Yeah, it's because you're far too sophisticated for the people around you. We're just going to skip right over that. No, I'm kidding. That's hilarious. Okay, really? So do you think that's the standard definition?
Well, this is what I think Aristotle meant by teleology. Before Aristotle was integrated into the Catholic Church, before
Hmm.
the Catholic Church turned Aristotle into a Christian thinker,
Hmm.
Aristotle was thinking in terms of time. He was
Hmm.
thinking in terms of causation when he spoke of
Hmm.
purpose or teleology.
Yeah, so I actually, I think what you've said is extremely provocative, and it's provocative because ordinarily, so okay, what do you think ordinary people think teleology means?
Well, I think ordinary people derive their interpretation of teleology from people like Descartes. So Descartes rejected teleology because Descartes imagined that we need to remove purposes from causal explanations in light of the mechanical philosophy, which is the
Hmm.
idea that motion occurs through some kind of mutual collision of particles or um, what Descartes called corpuscles
Hmm.
before the modern atomic theory.
Hmm.
Newton, I think, represented this transition away from Cartesian physics because Newton wanted to embrace the idea of action at a distance. I mean, that was what made the concept of gravity so significant. Um, but in general, I think, everyday people think that purpose means something like um, raison d'être, right, or reason to exist,
Hmm.
which in a certain sense I think it does, but in a limited
Me
sense.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
In other words, a modern scientist rejects the idea that the apple falls to the center of the earth because the apple wants to occupy the center of the earth.
Hmm.
Um,
And
Aristotle, I think,
obviously, you meant toward the center of the Earth. Go ahead.
well, Aristotle thought that Earth was naturally attracted to the center of the cosmos. So Aristotle thought that place means something. Descartes rejected the idea of place entirely and
Hmm.
replaced it with our everyday notion of space, right? So in modern science, no such thing as place really exists. No object intrinsically belongs to any place in modern science. And this is what makes all of our mathematical tools so powerful. We can extract or abstract an object from its context and treat it as some kind of abstract um, uh, being in a coordinate system or in some phase space. Descartes contrived this whole notion of coordinate systems and uh, grids um, in which we can manipulate or imagine the movement of objects. So his rejection of teleology, I think, was bound up with his emphasis on coordinate systems and the rejection of belongingness, which I think is still characteristic of modernity.
Hmm.
Even today, we sort of feel like we no longer belong to any place, and that I think that comes from people like Descartes ultimately in his perspective on physics, which Aristotle never shared. Aristotle believed that place was a physical concept. So the place of Earth is at the center of the cosmos for Aristotle, and he called that
Hmm.
teleology, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. So, and this also was, I think, uh, influential in the alchemical tradition because the alchemical tradition derived a lot of its ideologies from Aristotelian physics. Yeah. So the alchemist was essentially quickening the tempo of nature, and by quickening the tempo of nature, the alchemist was able to bring an object to its proper place, the place toward which the object naturally tends. So the alchemist was a kind of midwife of beings in the world, in a manner of speaking, in line
Do
with the
you
Aristotelian notion of telos. Yeah.
do you see some relation between this rectification of the object's developmental path and the intense fascination and awareness that you were experiencing in childhood?
Perhaps.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I noticed that in my own thought there's a relationship there of some kind. I don't mean to reify it, but um,
Well, the
oh,
alchemical tradition, I think, was much more specific than what I experienced.
yes, of course. But I want to go back. I don't mean to break the line of thought here, but I want to go back to the question you asked about the objects in the sky, if indeed they were even objects. The Because again, you have this problem of the violation of categories. We today think of such things usually, we tend to, as humans, we think of them as machines. Other people, such as Jacques Vallée, one of my other friends, Mr. S, uh, are not disinclined to consider that they could be projections of some kind, or even a sort of a virtualization, right?
Mhm.
Because they often appear to move in ways that are not dissimilar to how something moves on a computer screen, for example, or might move on a computer screen,
Sure.
without
Right.
concern, without concern for any apparent physical constraints, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, something about its motion I always found slightly unnerving, even to this
Mm-hmm.
day.
That
Um,
doesn't surprise me. I mean, I imagine first of all, this is a concept, or excuse me, this is a branch of experience that has fascinated me since childhood. Obviously, my childhood occurred primarily in the 1960s and early 70s. So we were, this is the time I probably read Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods when I was 8 or 9, maybe. We saw the movie a couple years later. We were very curious about such topics in my family, particularly my father and I had long discussions about what are UFOs. I was fascinated by aerospace, jet aircraft, missiles, all of these things. Sorry, there's going to be a little noise for a moment in the background. So, I was extremely curious about these things, but I was primarily curious because I suspected, having read quite a bit of science fiction in my youth, and the parents of my mind, the primary parents of my mind and my intellect were science fiction authors up until, I don't know, late teens, early 20s, when I began to read literature and a few other things. But my primary hope was that it might be possible to contact something that was actually intelligent. I'm not sure if I felt the same way that I feel now when I was younger. But even if I wasn't conscious of it, I felt very skeptical about what I would conceive of as the intelligence, quote unquote, of my species. Because at the species level, most of what our species does not only doesn't look intelligent, it looks reckless or misguided or omnicidal is a word I invented. I coined that a long time ago. Just like everything killing. So my hope was that it might be possible. There might be other intelligences in time space that compared to us were vastly more intelligent and could help us, it's this funny idea of the rectification, right? Could help us to correct, or at least could introduce ideas and ways of knowing and ways of seeing and ways of understanding and perhaps ways of relation and behavior that were much more trustworthy than what we usually see. And again, as a human being, we have this problem of being aware of the worst common denominator of human behavior or history, right? And we're not so aware of what I might call the best rare exemplars, or the best rare numerators or something like this if we're playing around with the language and the math. Because we so rarely encounter truly beautiful, maybe in art and sometimes in science and sometimes in philosophy, and perhaps even sometimes in religion or spirituality. But we very rarely directly encounter brilliant examples of humans embodying and enacting the up ladder, quote unquote, potentials that we certainly are capable of exploring, enacting, considering, reflecting upon, helping each other to see or grow into. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I tend to agree. I only became conscious of the intelligence behind what I experienced later. I began to intimate the possibility that the intelligence could be vaster than what I initially imagined.
And what did you initially imagine?
I initially imagined some kind of biological alien intelligence from some other star system.
Yeah, me too. But that was super exciting because I thought it's possible that they are vastly more intelligent than we are. It seems very likely that they would be.
It does, yeah.
And yet, when I began to research these things and read books and so on about it, and this is before this became sort of, there was always a bit of a craze, quote unquote, thing about it. but it wasn't culty. It wasn't yet culty, or it wasn't very culty until maybe the 90s. I mean, I don't know when, I guess the Urantia books came out in the 80s, which were essentially a sort of an ET religion. Are you familiar with that at all?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So, but when I began to read books, there were a variety of very problematical things about the books. And one of them was there was almost, not none, but it was extremely uncommon that there was any kind of coherent record of the transmission of intelligence between the others and humans. I found that very confusing.
Right.
How could that be true? You meet beings from the sky, or, you know, if we're going to be a little more exotic, time space, right? Or even more exotic, that which time space is some sort of lesser, a hypostasis of, right? A lesser dimensionalization of something beyond time space, which it very obviously these days, even physicists like Arkani Hamed and others have said categorically time space is doomed. For sure, that's not fundamental. You've heard noises like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which I'm sure we both find fascinating and fraught with potential for exciting new discoveries. Although I want to say something very, very briefly before I continue on this line. I don't want the humans to make any more exciting discoveries at all. I don't believe we can survive the discoveries we've made as a species.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say some very kind of severe sounding things for a minute, but then we'll get back to the sort of regular conversation. I don't think it's ethical to give the existing civilizations anything technological. They will use it to destroy, they would destroy time space if they could get away with it. You know, we hear these stories in some ancient religious texts about, well, we need to stop the humans from getting together, right? We need to confuse their languages, because if they have one language, they will attack heaven. Right? There's noises like this probably in certain parts of the Bible or the Apocrypha. We hear noises like this around the narrative of the Tower of Babel, right? They're actually trying to kill the angels and so forth. Yeah, we hear these kinds of noises. And actually, I'm an anthrophile. I love human beings, unlike many intellectuals who are misanthropes. But at the group level, we are so disoriented. And what orients us or captures our orienting capacities at the group level, they look essentially like demons to me. It almost doesn't matter if actual demons exist in sort of the terrifying sense of demons rather than the edifying or transcending sense of daimon, you know, teaching beings. But yeah, I mean, at the group level, we are a devastating nightmare. So I don't want there to be, like, I would, you know, I'm kind of like, I would wave a flag that says no more discoveries in terms of technology. And I think it's unethical for scientists who exist today to deliver their findings to modern civilization, societies, corporations, whatever, because it's just fundamentally going to be weaponized. We're in this trap of a race to the bottom. Your thoughts?
Well, this is why I tend to be skeptical of disclosure in general.
Say more.
Well, I mean, my impression is that disclosure will be used to peddle purportedly alternative forms of technology under the guise of some kind of extraterrestrial intervention, which I find extremely questionable.
Wow. Okay, so paint a little cartoon of what that looks like for us, please.
Well, the introduction of something like free energy in the midst of an energy crisis or a climate crisis, I think, is a real plausible scenario moving forward. So, our government engages in all sorts of continuity of business operations and continuity of government operations. So my suspicion is that some of those contingency plans involve espousing belief in extraterrestrial intervention of a technological nature. Um, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to try to encapsulate this. I'm going to try to encompass what you're suggesting here and also introduce some of my own perspective. But before I do that, just so I don't lose a thread that's important from before, we got here from a position in our discussion where you evince skepticism about what you called conspiratorial theories surrounding UFOs. And also, you were having difficulty, I think, forging a perspective from which you could make sense of the semblance of you having been selected by this phenomenon. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. So I'm just trying to keep the threads in order here, and we'll get back to the disclosure problem. We're going to bookmark that for a sec. So did it ever occur to you that you're extremely unusual, but you're probably not the only child like you, but your extremely unusual relationship with cognition, energy, and time might result in self-selection for such phenomena?
Yeah, that became clear much later.
Okay. Well, say something about that then.
Well, following those two experiences with the triangular objects,
Oh, by the way, were they this? Do they appear to be the same object or the same kind of object?
they were different, but they were the same kind of object. They were
Okay.
both triangular. They both had roughly 3 white lights. In the second case, the lights were far larger, and they appeared to be like portholes,
Right.
as
Okay.
opposed to pinpoints of light.
Okay. There's something I just want to highlight here. It's as if your experience is evolving, isn't it? Or one could imagine that. Let me put it
Yeah,
that way.
like I became conscious later that the experiences contain a certain kind of code or language, or yeah, there's something basically
Okay.
like a hidden logic.
Okay.
That,
Great. Yeah. Brilliant. I'm with you.
yeah, and this
Uh-huh.
is something that I actively investigate. So um, I continue to experience different revelations about what happened to me in the past, and the nature of existence and that kind of stuff. But what followed those two experiences was even more intriguing in a certain sense, because I became conscious of this relationship between my observation of celestial bodies and whatever this intelligence was, um, or is. So, about 6 months after those two experiences, I was walking down the street near dusk, and I became aware of this scintillating object in the sky. Um, and I just decided to stop in the road and observe its twinkling, its kind of scintillation. It was rapidly moving between different shades of blue, red, and white. It appeared to be flashing, and that can happen sometimes depending on the conditions of the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, I found it interesting. So I stood there on the road watching it for maybe 20 minutes. Um, and at a certain point, I decided to go home. So I turned around, and as soon as I turned around, I saw this um, what appeared to be an orange orb over the road, and it was in midair as I turned around. It was flying to the left, and it followed this kind of sigmoid shape in the sky, like an S-shaped curve behind a tree. So I was able to see the inside of this orb briefly. It appeared to be like almost like molten metal or gold swirling inside this ambient orange halo, and I could see the movement of this internal structure. It looked like fluid or something moving in a kind of vortex as this orb kind of, as the halo moved across the sky. And like I said, it disappeared behind this willow tree. So, I walked over to the willow tree and I didn't see anything. Um, so I went home. but I, but later it became, clear to me that there was some relationship between that scintillating object in the sky, which was probably a planet or maybe a star, and this orb that I experienced. And what I found curious about that was this kind of coordination in space between the motion of my body just happening to glimpse it behind me, um, as I withdrew from observing this scintillating object. Uh, so there was something within the flow of time there that I gradually became more conscious of, as I grew up, I guess, or just as I molded over, for years. Um, so I wanted to mention that too. So as I, continued to develop, these connections became more bizarre or more problematical. Yeah.
um, okay, so there's a hovering implication in the background here that I want to introduce just so that I don't lose it. Because some threads in my own consciousness are very difficult to sustain over time, right? It's as if there are certain ideas that are much more difficult to keep in consciousness long enough to follow the thread. Does this make any sense to you?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Okay. So obviously dreaming is a certain kind of problematical situation for memory, but there are certain modes of insight which integrate over the field of the branches of human knowledge that are extremely problematical to hold in consciousness for more than a few moments. In this case, I'm able to do so for some reason I don't quite understand. And it could be the synergy of our intelligences that makes it easier. I'd suggest that it is. Consider a situation, you know what world lines are in relativity?
Mm-hmm.
I thought you might. Consider a situation in which something violates them. So, as I understand it, and I may have this wrong, I'm not a physicist. Each observer has a certain intrinsically unique status in terms of its world line, in that no other observer, quote unquote, no other point of presence in experience, subjectivity, whatever we want to call it, can occupy the same thing, right? The same world line. Is that similar to your understanding?
Yeah, I think so.
Great. So if two people are standing right together and someone flashes a light at them, it doesn't cause their world lines to collapse. They may both see the light. They will see it from different angles. It will reach them at slightly different times. Yeah?
Right.
Okay, great. So imagine something that violates that, right? It starts to, it by its appearance, it collapses world lines. So it unifies. Remember how you were talking about historical rectification in your childhood? You're talking about doing something to the world line of the situation, are you not? In a
Right. Okay.
sense?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you got me. And so now here's this object that actually might be doing something extremely related to your obsessive concern in childhood.
Right. Exactly.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we don't have the right language, and I'm not a quantum physicist, and I'm very leery of people who like to use their probably clumsy understandings of concepts from quantum physics to explain metaphysical phenomena and so forth. I'm very leery of that. I'm not saying there's nothing good in that garden, but it makes me itchy usually. And then at the same time, sometimes I myself will do it. So I'm going to make that mistake here after admitting it, and try to imagine what would happen if something appeared that was mostly in superposition, but partly not. That would mean that local to that object, it could mean anyway, that world lines merge or they blur around this object. And if that's happening, that means that time, okay, time is going to become sort of a multi-liquid. Identity is no longer going to be the same thing. You're not who you are anymore. Birth and death, before and after, above and below, the entire problem of angles on the sphere, all of those things are placed into a non-ordinary situation. What do you think?
I can see what you mean.
Okay.
Yep.
Certainly something at least vaguely similar has occurred to you, yes?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes toy with this idea that space itself is the composition or the simultaneous appearance of different temporal scales. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so I can perhaps
I
see how
like
that
that.
ties into what I think you mean.
Yes, because if there's something in, by the way, this brings us back to the importance of not merely of place, but of moment. Because we are bodies. And as bodies, we are something like points of presence. Now, what produces the point is up for uh, what creative. Um, I'm at a loss for a word here. Imaginings, essentially, right? Creative speculation. That's the word I want. And I don't think that we are as distinct as we imagine. I think that I usually prefer to think I can think many different things. I can think many things at once when I'm lucky. But I usually prefer to think that the point of presence that we are is not so much an individual, but an instancing of many relationships. Does that make any sense?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. Now, I don't want to get lost in Darren's thoughts or perspectives on reality. That's not why we're here today. So let's redirect the conversation back to our bookmark. And what was that bookmark? Help me out. Can you recall?
You mentioned disclosure.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. I got lost in the thread mess there for a minute. And that was almost hypnotic. So,
Mm-hmm.
all right. So I want to just say a few things about this disclosure thing. So first of all, I want to recapitulate something like what you said, that the government could essentially run a psyop, if I was understanding you, in which the existence of free energy would be falsely associated with relationships with either non-existent or non-actually relating with us aliens. Were you proposing something like that?
Yeah, free energy could be justified under the guise of its having descended from some alien intelligence. Yeah.
Right. And so, maybe 20 years ago now or close, I wrote an essay called Free Energy Would Mean the End of Life on Earth. I presume that you don't believe our species could survive the introduction of free energy, do you?
No.
Neither do I. How long do you think, if somebody produced a free energy device and introduced it, how long do you think we'd have? Just take a wild guess.
Matter of weeks?
Yeah, me too. Yeah, the humans certainly in their present state can't be trusted with anything that could be, that's the ultimate weapon. In fact, it's a weapon that you can just keep making weapons with it. I recall a not too old episode of Star Trek. I don't remember which series it was. It's one of the newer ones where the Federation detects a warp signature at a previously off limits in terms of the Prime Directive planet, right? Because the thing that determines when you can go contact them directly is when they become capable of warp drives, right? So the Federation detects a warp signature. They send a ship there, ship disappears. So they send another ship. And what they find out is that this planet has discovered the technology that warp drives are based on, but it's their intention, and what they're doing is producing weapons with it. They're producing warp weapons, which not just kind of, is a world-ending technology. It can actually damage time-space.
Right.
And this goes back to the problem with the humans not being trustworthy with the techne of the divine beings or the gods or the sky beings or however we want to think about that. But I just want to briefly outline something that I'm a little bit concerned about, and feel free to ask me questions or I will ask you further questions. Give me just a moment here. So we've heard from people like David Grush and others, many others, to such a degree that it seems unlikely that the whole thing is a fabrication, that the United States government is now and has long been in possession of crashed alien objects, alien technologies, some things which have been either partially or, somewhat successfully reverse engineered. They are in possession of intelligence about non-humans of some kind, right? We don't know whether they're physical beings, whether they are, there's probably, actually, it's not that they are one thing. There's a spectrum. Even when we just say the phrase, the phenomenon, right? We're referring to a broad spectrum of phenomena. We're referring to a broad spectrum of possible explanations. There could have been beings from other planets that actually visited our planet in a spacecraft. There could also be things that resemble that or mimic it that are not beings in a spacecraft, and so forth. Does all that make sense so far?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so if some faction of the government is in possession of technologies from other intelligences or transcendent things, that would be the holy grail of asymmetric military advantage. It would also be the holy grail of asymmetric commercial advantage. And since our collectives, at the collective scale, we are captured with by game theoretical, deadly, lethal game theoretical, what would I call it? A milieu. Nothing would survive if the humans weaponize that, and also if there's some branch of the government in possession of such things. We've heard stories of vast underground cities, bases, all kinds of things that have been constructed using non-human technologies. I'm not sure if this is reliable or not. But if there were a branch of the government in possession of such things, even just of intelligence about non-humans, it's the most top secret thing of all top secret things. It makes things like bioweapons and nuclear weapons look like fucking romper room. So if there's a branch in possession of that stuff, effectively what we have is a speciation event. Those aren't humans anymore. Whatever they are, they're not gods. And they might be Homo sapiens, in their bodies, but they're not us. They're not regular humans. They don't have to live by the rules or any of the stuff that we think is running our civilizations. Your thoughts?
It makes sense to me.
So when you spoke about, for example, the introduction, tell me some of your concerns surrounding disclosure. Just, improvise.
Well, I mean, my familiarity with the whole history of the UFO phenomenon leads me to suspect a certain dimension of highly organized, nefarious military involvement.
Me too.
From the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So I learned about...
Vali is quite on this page as well.
Right. Yeah, so making sense of that is important um, to any coherent theory of what we currently face. Um, so the Maury Island incident, for example.
Say more. Explain what that means, what that is.
So prior to the Kenneth Arnold sighting um, on June 24th, 1947, there was an incident near Tacoma, Washington, on Maury Island involving two people who claimed that a group of flying saucers ejected some kind of liquid metal that fell to Earth, was captured, and transported by Army pilots. Have you heard of this before?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Not
Um,
prior to Arnold. I haven't. No.
yeah, it took place 3 days before the Kenneth Arnold sighting.
Oh, wow. Didn't know about this. This is news to me.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, Kenneth Arnold, as I recall, was paid by a man named Ray Palmer to investigate the Maury Island incident.
Ray's name is familiar to me, at least. I'm with you.
Yeah, Ray Palmer was, as I recall, the editor of Amazing Stories, which was a science fiction magazine.
Oh, that was super important in my childhood. Yeah.
He essentially paid Kenneth Arnold to investigate the Maury Island incident, which involved a man named Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman. Interestingly, Harold Dahl, um, well, no, Fred Chrisman was later involved in the John F. Kennedy assassination, which is rather bizarre. That was investigated by Ken Thompson in one of his books. He was, yes, a very strange fellow. He was sort of suspended between the early history of ufology and this other strange conspiracy. Um, yeah, but just the precedence of the Maury Island incident and the involvement of Army pilots and their subsequent crash, their plane, which was supposedly carrying this retrieved crash debris, itself crashed over some forest, and all the evidence was lost, presumably. So, if from the very beginning, it just something about it seems highly strange, obviously. So it's worth looking into the Maury Island case because it predated the Kenneth Arnold sighting, and the military was already involved. So
Hmm. And I think you and I both agree. Let's just see if we agree. The military is exactly the wrong branch of humanity to be, quote, in charge of and or collecting such intelligence. Do we agree there?
of course, yeah,
And B, we don't actually have a branch. We haven't forged a branch of our species that would be a good selection for this necessity. We agree there.
I agree. Yes,
And C, maybe we should probably get on with that right quick. Do we agree there?
yeah,
Because if we as human beings believe that we are intelligent, or we believe that there's such a thing as intelligence, then probably the two most important things we could possibly do is pursue. I'm sorry to be using alphabets here. Is pursue the establishment of the possibility of an intelligent human collective. Number one. I guess if I don't use letters, I have to use numbers. I'm sorry. And then number two, compose a branch of human knowledge, research, behavior, and relationships that reconnect us to the intelligences that are clearly present here on Earth in the other biologies and are very likely to be present beyond the Earth, whether that presence is as physical organisms on other worlds or as some feature of the nature of, I don't know what, reality, time space, whatever time space is a hypostasis of, etc. Your thoughts?
yeah. The alien intelligence needs to be localized to this planet. I think the alien intelligence is coming from our surroundings, from our environment.
Say more.
Um, Well, I mean, you probably know about the works of Michael Persinger, who discovered the relationship between tectonic strain and anomalous luminous phenomena, ALPs.
Hmm.
Um, he wrote several papers on that. And that notion, as simple as it might seem, can carry you into like an alternative kind of mental space where suddenly the nature of human cognition in relation to its environment can be physically grounded. Um, so, like, I tend to suspect that direct realism is an appropriate characterization of human perception, and grounding direct realism in something like the interaction between geophysical forces, meteorological forces, and electrochemical phenomena in the human body um, seems to be the most promising path when compared to like contemporary cognitive neuroscience, which is downstream from a lot of bad philosophy. Um,
Yeah, this is something that we're going to get into at length, perhaps a little bit in this conversation, but also in future conversations. Because what you just, those, let's see, downstream of a lot of bad. Yeah, the 6 or 7 words you said there describe much of Tyler's cognitium, downstream of a lot of bad philosophy. And what I mean by describe much of your cognitium isn't that you fit in there, but rather that you have determined, you have sort of established a little island outside of bad philosophy from which you conduct perspectival operations against it.
right. Yes.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Uh-huh. So you're essentially a secret agent for the universe.
That's how it feels.
Me too. I think that's part of why we recognize one another. Um,
Exactly.
and
That's
and I think that's part of what it means to be a child. The problem is that most of the children get captured and compromised. And as we know from Mission Impossible, if you were caught or killed, the secretary will disavow any knowledge of your actions. um, I mean that as a joke. So, right. Do you think? What is your perspective? Do you think there are aliens in the sense of biological entities?
I doubt it.
Really?
Yeah, I doubt that aliens from some other star system appear here. Um,
Okay.
I
Do you
think
do you
the
think it's possible? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
the alien intelligence is all around us. The alien intelligence is within us, even. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, we agree about that. I mean, I would say that we're actually composed of. I like the neologism transsentience, um, but I think that our intelligence is a modest hypostasis, a lesser instance of something staggeringly transcendental that is native to whatever time space is a lesser stasis of. Um, so let me pose a toy to you. Imagine that you find one day in your kitchen. You live by yourself. You find one day in your kitchen a glass of water is on the table. You know that you did not put the glass there. Someone put it there. You decide not to interfere with it. Some days later, perhaps 45 or whatever, the water has evaporated in the bottom of the glass. There are white crystals. Do you know where I'm going here?
Not
It's okay
quite.
if you don't. It's okay. So the white crystals turn out to be salt. You taste them; they're salty. You run some chemical tests. They're actually sodium chloride. So you realize that the water was salty, right? And so when the water evaporated, the content in the water crystallized in the bottom of the glass. Make sense?
Yes.
Great. So Earth probably isn't entirely dissimilar to such a glass of water. If you get organisms here, and minds and like octopuses and praying mantises. And by the way, like there's nothing as shocking as organisms. Organisms are fundamentally impossible. If you pointed your finger at the sky and you went like, I don't know, a million light years in that line, the chances of your chances of encountering an octopus are zero. There's I mean none of them, right?
Exactly.
Out there. So you're looking at phenomena that are so staggeringly impossible that humans should have just started screaming, going like, whenever they tried to name a thing, it should have just been, what the fuck is that? Like that can't exist. You know, because tigers, it can't exist. Praying mantises can't exist. Octopuses, trees, the simplest these are impossible beings. And I'm trying to sing the praises of the world that we live on, a world that I adore and believe to be a being, or even something we don't have a category for, that generates the possibility of beings as a side effect of whatever that, more than merely a being is doing. And I'm getting a little bit into, my own sort of philosophy or cosmology or concern here. But what I'm trying to get at is this. If you get hands or eyes or minds on Earth, then the water of time-space, so to speak, right, the milieu, the context, must be productive of those things. What you don't get in the glass of water on your kitchen table is a wristwatch, right? Because the water isn't wristwatchy. You see what I'm getting at?
Right, of course.
So
Yeah.
I'm trying to say that like time-space must be eyesy. It must be wingsy.
Yes, precisely.
It must be handsy and mindsy and adoration-y
Yes.
and all these things, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it's staggeringly weird that we are in the grip of a variety of ontological deceptions that pretend that time-space is just machiny. It's machiny? What? Like, what? It's hammery? No. If I was Amon Hillman, I'd like go off camera right now and make some spanking noises. Slap, 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 slap.
Right.
Machiny? No.
Well, I mean, this is why the Goethean theory of light matters so much to me, because I think Goethe enables us to understand something about space, such that organisms inherit features from space itself.
Yes.
Which gives them these properties, as you mentioned.
And so this is why I think it's weird, though, that you think there aren't. Well, I'm not objecting, and I want to know more. But if time space is handsy and eyesy and mindsy and octopusy and like praying mantisy and stuff, then it must be aliensy, because our world seems to me to be filled with billions of aliens. This is a world in space. These are space creatures all around us. The insects, the spider, the wasp, the nudibranch, the mantis shrimp, the octopus, the whale, the dolphin. These are aliens. They're right here. We don't have to go anywhere to meet other minds. Our minds are made of alien minds, it seems to me. But say whatever's in your heart or mind at the moment. I'll stop blathering.
Well, in my view, cognition forms a continuum with the morphology of the organism. So what we call cognition is fundamentally similar to, or even the same as, identical with, what we call the form of the living body.
Brilliant. I see.
And you can see this, for example, in the case of plants, which are stationary beings. The plant is really a kind of wave. So what in the plant waves? And this is what Goethe called the Erbpflanze. This is the Platonic idea of the plant, or the soul of the plant, what Aristotle
The
might call
essence, yeah. Or wait, even the okay, let's say a little more about that. I don't want to just run over it. It's the originary modus. I don't know. Help me out.
Yeah, the originary image that belongs to the deep past. So the resurrection of this idea in the present is precisely what I think Plato meant by anamnesis, which I
Hmm.
think Goethe also saw in the living body of plants, um, because these waves characterize organisms themselves, in the same way that our own brains supply frequencies at which we perceive solid objects. Um, the forms of organisms themselves evince this underlying vibrating uh, image. So the reconstruction of that image, I think, is fundamentally holographic because space itself is holographic. Um, I mean, it
Okay,
works
well,
the same
I'm
way
sorry.
as light. It works like light. In other words, the body of the tree is fundamentally analogous to the beam of light that we can pass through the prism because it undergoes the same number of expansions and contractions.
Hmm. Say more about that last feature, the same
So
number of expansions and contractions.
as you move from the root to the seed of the flowering plant, you undergo 3 expansions and 3 contractions. So the seed is a kind of contraction. The seed leaves, or cotyledons, are also a kind of contraction. The roots are a kind of expansion. So the seed mediates above and below these 2 kinds of movement, which recur in the human organism. So our own bodies undergo similar expansions and contractions. We call contractions sensation,
Hmm.
whereas we call expansions action. So this is why the philosophy of Henry Bergson, I think, is rather profound because he acknowledged the existence of perception as virtual action. So
Oh my
um,
God, were you were you expressing these principles in your childhood? Because I can't help but see the reflection.
uh, I can't say so. I mean, I discovered this
Okay,
independently many years later through my own readings.
I know it. Can you see that your perception of the relationships in form, space, and time
Okay.
produced.
Well, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay, great.
exactly.
So I'm just going to finish it for the listeners. Produced in you not merely a sensation, but an excitation, which then led to what I'm going to call a transcendental action that you spoke of as a sudden movement.
Right.
Okay, good. That's the laughter I've been wanting to hear in this
Mhm.
conversation. Okay, good. Keep going. I'm with you.
Okay, so the organs of the plant form a coherent whole. The body of the plant is a whole, which exercises causal power. Now, the extent to which wholes exercise causal powers, I think, is almost entirely overlooked by modern physics because of our tendency to reductionism, our tendency to emphasize the role that parts play over wholes.
Mhm.
Um, in my view, wholes are causal agents, much as they were for Aristotle. Um,
Yeah, let's call them unities.
Unities, yeah, sure.
I prefer. Yeah.
Uh,
Now, the weird thing about the unities, and particularly the biorelational unities here on Earth, is that they form what I refer to as hyperstructures, which are catastrophically multidimensional relational webs, right? So, what you'll never see, for example, is a world with nothing but an oak tree or nothing but an ant.
right.
Or you see what I'm getting at? Like the forms that we see here are not possible in the isolation that we imagine if we think about individuals. And so somehow they are a field phenomena. And this is, people are like, we should save the ecologies because they're really important to the future of humans. No, that's not why they're important. Um, that isn't untrue. I don't think you can harm the ecologies of Earth without harming the interiority of humans in real time. You kill one whale, that whale dies in every being on this planet, in my view. Right? It's a field. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the relations between bodies in external space is mirrored in the coherence of the living body itself. So you
Yes.
can see this kind of symmetry between the macrocosm and the microcosm at work.
Yes. And I also, I mean, I suspect very strongly rather provocative ideas such as the Earth is a member of a family of similar worlds that can probably communicate among each other instantaneously, so that what we mess up here has to be mitigated or suffered in other places. Like damage here causes damage elsewhere, healing here, quote unquote, causes healing elsewhere. Um, the humans have a very crude idea of what a planet is, and they think it's separate. I very much doubt this. I have strong reason to believe that this is not the case, and it's not a theoretical belief. It's reason from direct experience.
Mhm.
I don't know what, I can't tell you exactly what the planet is, but if I could even point you in that direction, it would obliterate the entire tree of categories with which you've been familiarized by humans.
Mhm.
It would just lay waste to that. It would burn it down. And it would burn it down with beauty, like ecstasy.
Mhm.
What's going on here is so preciously profound and beautiful that we don't even have concepts that resemble it in our lexicon, in the category trees from which our lexicons arise. And I love this world. I love the living beings of this world. I adore them. I know them as my own nature, origin, meaning, body, purpose, all these things. So I'm just want to sing these praises while we have a moment, and let us return then to Goethe and holes and the compression and expansion.
Right. The the organs of any organism internally cohere according to a certain kind of logic, which I think Goethe was responsible for discovering in a major way. Um, as opposed to regarding the organs of an organism as essentially disparate taxonomical names or parts, we should recognize how the appearance of any one organ presupposes the appearance of every other organ.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Which you can
Oh my God.
understand according to this kind of wave form that never incarnates as an object, but this
Oh,
waveform
right.
is
Oh
the
my God.
condition.
Yes.
Yeah.
In a sense, is this in any way related to what Cornfed calls affordances?
Um, yeah, in my view, perhaps I introduced the idea of affordances from James Gibson,
Hmm.
who was a direct realist, which is why I find his theories useful. But um, yeah, I would say so.
Okay, I need to hear you say something about direct realism because I'm not clear on what that phrase means. Help me understand it, and feel free to be, like, explain it to the 5-year-old that I sometimes become.
Well, direct realism is the notion that perception directly accesses phenomena in the external world. The paradigm of modern science is what you might call an indirect realist paradigm, because modern science essentially contends that we perceive not the external world as it really exists, but by virtue of some process in the body, we decipher or encode information in the external world in ways that fundamentally corrupt the original image. So this all comes from Galileo and from British empiricism. Um, because Galileo
Isn't there? Okay, let me just interrupt. Please hold your thought, and I also want you to bookmark Bergson because you mentioned him and we branched. Um, isn't there though a precedent for this in the Greek thought because they thought something like it is impossible for us to understand. Okay, let me see if I can recapitulate this. Surely it is not possible for us to perceive directly what is true or good or real because we are human and our senses and the form of our humanity deceive us. Therefore, the only chance of us perceiving the true, the real, or the good is if we have a way to escape that cage. They thought of this, I think there was a phrase called the soma pneumatica, which was the spectral body. This isn't exactly the same as an out-of-body experience, though it might be related. They want, okay, is any of this making any sense, that we're stuck in our senses and the forms of our senses deceive us about the nature of things?
Well, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
I'm reminded of that
However,
by what you're saying. Go ahead.
well, I, however, would reject the idea that that somehow diminishes the reality of my perception
Mm.
right now.
Okay.
So I invest my perception right now with as much reality as how the world might look beyond my physical mantle. And this
I
has to
see.
do with the holographic nature of space, as I mentioned. So once you embrace the notion that space is holographic, as opposed to some kind of neutral medium or monolithic container in which things are arbitrarily moving,
Mm-hmm.
the reality of your perception or the direct uh, accessibility of phenomena through your perception becomes, I think, much more coherent. And the philosophy of Henry Bergson, I think, is one of the foundations of a direct realist theory of perception, as it was for James Gibson, because he was fundamentally a Bergsonian thinker.
Mm.
And yeah.
All right, I have a couple of questions briefly. The first is when we think of the term holographic, we tend to think of things like photographs and or movies. Is it not so?
Holograms are distinct from photographs because in a hologram, every region contains the potential to reconstruct the whole image.
I
So,
follow. I'm
yeah,
going to go somewhere with this, though. So I'm going to replace the word in my original question. I'm going to replace the word photograph with image. Okay, now are we closer?
sure.
Let me actually pose my question. Rather than the concept of holographic, what about the idea of holotemporal? Holotemporal,
Yes. Hmm.
right? That the past, present, and future are somehow all being presented simultaneously. They are accessible, they are simultaneously accessible in what seems to be, well, I don't know, what, linear time?
Yeah, in my view, the past perpetually enters the present through this kind of memorial process because memory is an elementary property of the external holographic field.
Hmm. And what about the future?
Yeah, the future, I think, is also entering the present. So, temporality is what Heidegger called an ecstatic unity.
We agree uh, in principle about this matter. That I also, however, believe that the past is transformed by how we see and behave and relate in the present. Your thoughts?
I think it would need to be if the future exercises causal influence. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Because we know, for example, that I can change the meaning. One of the things that gives me hope, I'm often a bit of a doomsinger about the humans, but one of the things that gives me hope is that it's clear to me that it is possible for us to do something so beautiful or so intelligent or so insightful in this moment that we change the meaning of history.
Precisely. Yeah, I think transforming the meaning of history is inevitable.
It is, but we have. Well, do you think there's free will?
Yes.
And is there also restriction of free will?
Well, in my view, freedom is bound up with the interval that separates the stimulation of the body from its possible response.
Oh my God.
Whereas the future is bound up more with the form of the body itself. So, what we perceive as affordances in our environment, which constellate the possibility of our own future, are reflections of our own morphology. Yeah.
Have you ever? Humans have this idea that recurs in science fiction, which I think is kind of silly. At present, I think it's silly, though I understand why they forged it. Once they made machines, they thought, oh, maybe someday we will make a vehicle that can travel in time and we'll call it a time machine. You follow?
Right.
But you are weirder than a time machine because you have moved your consciousness beyond the the fucking event horizon of
Yeah.
rationality, of physicality, and of temporality. And so often when you speak, I feel like I'm getting signals from a satellite mind that's beyond that. Yeah, I'm just going to stop there. I'm not saying we have to end the conversation. I'm going to stop making my statement there. I don't know what to say beyond that. Sometimes when you speak of your perspectives and the perspectives you have integrated into your way of understanding and learning and seeking, it's pretty unusual. It's almost like the first the first signals that I received during my non-ordinary experience with the intelligences that I refer to as Toymaker. It's like I'm talking with a non-human intelligence.
Exactly. Yeah, we. I think we share that in common.
Huh.
Um,
I find that very refreshing, a little bit frightening, and very exciting.
yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, I'm very excited too.
Okay, so do we want to stay on the branch of Goethe and Bergson and so on? Or do you have questions?
I mean, the circumstances of our meeting have been pretty compelling. Um, I'm interested in your background, how you managed to get involved with the institute. Um, that would be worth covering at some point, and we don't have to do that here now, but knowing that would be personally fulfilling. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but
Yeah, I'm happy to address that. I want to ask you some other questions because I have a vast library of yeah, questions to ask you. So, what do you think? What is dreaming? I'm going to ask you what is dreaming? What is dreaming for? What is dreaming doing? Address them in any order you wish, or modify the questions if you prefer.
well, dreaming is clearly related to memory. The images that appear in dreams appear to be derived from memories in waking consciousness. The logic of dreams, I think, is somewhat different from the imagery presented. Um, so, in my view, the logic of dreams and the imagery of dreams um, should be separated. Um, I notice sometimes that, as I mentioned before, um, the way in which phosphenes manifest
Oh my God,
as I
yes.
fall asleep
Uh-huh.
tie into the thoughts in my mind. So I end up seeing, sometimes I end up seeing on my eyelids what I was immediately thinking. Uh, in terms of images or uh, dramatic scenes, which I think are probably the basis of dreaming. Um, so light and cognition appear to be bound together in ways that I think relate even to the form of, as I mentioned already, plants and the visible spectrum. Um, so dreaming has something to do with the nature of light or electricity engendered endogenously through biophotons. So biophotons really exist. We know that now. And, Plato obviously subscribed to this extramissionist theory of vision. So Plato believed that light actually emanates from the eyes, which, as we now know, is probably true, and probably ties into some kind of uh, dream relevant process. Okay. Um,
Okay, let me re-encapsulate that for the listeners. So you're saying something like vision isn't a passive process where the eyes receive photons. Vision involves the projection of something. It may include biophotons, it may primarily be biophotons, but there may be other things that are projected as well. Thus, when we, as many ancients believed, when we look, in English we say we look at something, we look upon a subject, we are actually touching it in some way. Rupert Sheldrake, has supposed that people can detect when they are being observed by other people or beings, and sometimes by cameras. Um, and so it's not clear. Okay, I'm going to eliminate the cameras from the equation just to keep things simple for the moment. It seems, you know, that rays, something like rays or waves or something like this, emanate from our eyes. And part of what you were saying about dreaming is that when you close your eyes, these things we call phosphenes, which for people who don't know what those are, if you very gently, and please do it gently, close your eyes and then press gently on your eyelids, hold that there for a little while, you will begin to see some colors or some patterns and so forth. These are what are called phosphenes. And Tyler is suggesting that these phosphenic images, as we are falling asleep, mix with thoughts to produce the seeds of what become the dramatic presentations in dreaming, something like this. Have I got you mostly correct there, Tyler, or?
yeah, I think so. So, yeah, in my view, direct realism is probably true because light is already structured by the time it enters your eyes. So, the appearance of phosphenes on your eyelids that conform to certain kinds of mental images is just the inversion of that process. So, processing never takes place in the brain in the way that we tend to think in modern cognitive neuroscience, using the computer metaphor of mind. Rather, the light is already structured and informative by the time it enters your eyes. So, light itself exhibits a certain kind of structure, uh, unlike rays or waves, which are ultimately abstractions.
Mm-hmm.
This is what I think Goethe also understood. Um, any beam of light contains a coherent image. Um,
Mm.
as opposed to regarding the beam of light as some kind of external entity propagating through space, we should acknowledge that what looks like a beam of light on a two-dimensional surface contains a three-dimensional image, which is structured by matter, right? Because light only becomes visible in the presence of matter, which is how light, or the structure of light, is already informative by the time it reaches your eyes. Your brain doesn't do anything to it. Your brain isn't processing. Again, the idea that the brain somehow engages in this process of decoding is asinine. Your brain isn't doing anything of the nature, anything of the sort. Um, your brain is just a, your brain is just a resistor. So your brain inhibits the propagation of a signal. which is what gives rise to the present moment.
Okay, I want to ask you carefully to distinguish between. All right, you are using the word is in an explicit sense. So I want to be clear. Are you saying that you're asking us to believe that what you are saying is the fact of what's going on, or are you asking us to entertain this perspective because it is useful? And either answer is fine. Don't be worried. I'm okay either way. When you say the brain is a resistor, are you asking us to believe that that is the fact? You see where I'm going?
I'm playing with the computer metaphor of mind. So as opposed to regarding the brain as a as a processor, we should regard the brain as an analog component, because the brain is doing something analog, not digital. Which is why these attempts in modern artificial intelligence to create consciousness through software are ultimately doomed. They're based on an improper metaphor, I think. You need a concrete wave to generate consciousness. You can't just do it in software.
What do you think? Okay, so one of my friends, and I think he's not the only one who thinks this, supposes, I'll use this word, but I still want you to answer my first question before I go on. Are you asking us to view these matters as if what you are saying is useful as a perspective to see from? Or are you asking us to hear you say, this is my perspective, this is the one I believe to be true, or something else?
Yeah, I mean, this is my perspective. So,
okay, great. So one of my friends was saying about the artificial intelligence conundrum that it might be that if you forge a substrate complex enough, the sort of what we might think of as the intelligence, and or what I usually use the word transsentience to refer to, of that is natural to the medium, right, to whatever the medium is, whether it's time, space, or something beyond it, could then just sort of take up residence in it. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, the possibility of incarnation.
Yeah, sort of like it's it's a bit like if you make it, they will come, right? But in this case, you make a substrate complex enough to support intelligence, then some kinds of intelligence will naturally find their way into it, and as you say, incarnate. Even though I think I think we'd have to call it enmachinate.
Sure. Yeah.
Because there's no carne there.
Well, I suspect that you need more than a substrate. You need
Okay.
some kind of dynamic motion. And can you hear me all
Huh.
right? I know it's raining over
Yes.
here.
Yes, I can hear you okay. There's a little tiny bit of an echo, but I hear you.
Okay, good. Um, I think you need the capacity for motion for consciousness to arise. So
But of
what we call,
course, inside the machine, there is the capacity for electromagnetic motion among the transistors and resistors and memory elements and so forth. No?
but its motion is abstract as opposed to concrete. So its motion takes the form of the interaction of extrinsically interlocking parts that lack a coherent idea. So in other words,
Oh. They have not the thing that the tree or the bird has.
precisely.
They have not that essence that we spoke of earlier. And by the way, you speak of Plato fairly regularly, but I want to be clear about something simple. He was not the originator of the idea of anamnesis. He may be what brought that idea to us in text or something. Yeah. It was not, he got that from someone, is
Oh
what
yeah,
I'm trying to say. Yeah. And also, I recently listened to a brilliant podcast, which I've probably linked on my channel somewhere, in which a scholar of Plato was basically saying that he was lying a lot on purpose, that he didn't believe in the forms. He was using this as an expedient to get us to think in a certain way, which is very common in the articulate thought of the Greeks and the philosophers. Quite common, I think. Did this ever occur to you, or do you take Plato literally?
Oh, it occurs to me.
Okay,
I
okay, great.
mean, Plato is a pen name.
Right, and yeah, he was clearly this person who I was listening to. I'll see if I can find him. He was saying, I can find him fairly quickly. He was saying that Plato was very fond of this idea, which it's in line with Owen Barfield's idea of what Barfield calls theoria, which is the predecessor to hypotheses. And theoria concerned itself primarily with better ways of seeing, like perspectivity, not truth, not factuality, not validation, none of that. Better ways of seeing. And we've discussed this previously in our conversations because I brought it up before, right? Like science fiction, which gives you a broad array of astonishing lenses of perspective, is not about what exists. It's not about the facts. It doesn't care about the facts. It cares about better ways of seeing and how to see. Other forms of literature are similar. Some forms of playing are similar. Some forms of music are similar. Poetics, very similar. Poetics has nothing to do with the facts whatsoever, right? And yet it frees us from certain kinds of traps or cages or perhaps gravity wells in consciousness, so that actually what it frees us from is the expected structure of language. I've occasionally read someone writing something where I was almost offended. I felt nearly violated. I felt like, surely it is impossible for humans to say or think that. I never imagined that it was even possible to think or to say or to write what you have thought or written or said. Yeah? So this idea of theoria, which Barfield says dies right around the time of Galileo's theories that upset the church, not because he's saying the earth orbits the sun, but because he's saying that from now on, and maybe it doesn't start with Galileo, it may start much earlier, I'm not sure, but he uses this example. From now on, theories that save the appearances or match realities are a new form of truth that cannot be contested, right? There's no way to contest them. The video I was referencing is Gnostic Inform's interview with Jason Reza Giorgiani, who I think is also interviewed recently on Danny Jones's channel. Not a huge fan of Danny Jones, by the way, but he does interview some amazing people. It's the podcast is called Plato's Terrifying Secret Doctrines, and I found it really fascinating. Mostly what he's saying is that Plato was making things up all over the place on purpose, and that he was profoundly aware of the power of irony, of certain forms of sarcasm. It's clear that Socrates often doesn't mean what he is saying, and in fact mimics certain features of those perspectives that he opposes in order to call them into question or awareness. Is this making any sense?
Yeah, I think so.
I didn't mean to branch so severely there. I want to ask you some more questions about dreaming. Are there dreams from your childhood that stand out in your memory?
I can't think of one. No.
Adolescence?
No.
Adulthood?
I mean, nothing stands out as being particularly profound or shocking. Although some of my work with dreams ended up being rather transformative. Yeah.
And what do you mean by work with dreams? Say more about that.
learning how to recall dreams.
Mm. Hmm.
Yeah.
And did you ever record them?
Yes. Yeah, I
Was
did.
that also helpful?
Yeah, recording my dreams allows me to enter the kind of mentality wherein memory is enhanced, which
Hmm.
can be beneficial.
Yeah,
So,
I think there's a profoundly rich and crucial relationship between dreaming and memory. But in a future conversation, I want to talk with you um, in a very detailed way about memory and what we actually think that is, or is about, and so forth. But I want to ask you a couple of simple questions about dreaming. Um, do you th- what do you think illuminate? Okay, so first of all, are your dreams? Do you experience something resembling vision in dreaming, that so that you see scenes, or you seem to see scenes?
yeah.
Uh, do you think that the illumination is the same thing as light when you're awake, or do you think it is a different kind of illumination, or what do you think?
What do I think in my dreams?
No, not what do you think in your dreams. I mean, I don't even know if we think in dreams. I mean, whatever we do, this is what I'm kind of asking, actually, is something really weird. Because I seem to have something resembling thoughts in dreaming occasionally, but they do not seem to be like thoughts that I
Mhm.
have when I'm awake. Not that I can understand what thoughts are while I'm awake either. Those are really weird too. But what I want to ask you is, what do you think it is that illumines the space, the visual space in your dreaming? Is it light, or is it something else?
Um, it's probably not light. Um,
Ah, I agree.
yeah, but it's related to light.
Yes, I agree with that too.
Yeah. So the imagery that emerges in dreams, I think, is probably due to the decoupling of action from perception. So in waking
Mm,
consciousness, the relationship between sensation and perception or action is quite unified, forming a coherent circuit. Um, when when that circuit, essentially, I think that dreaming cleaves that circuit to some extent. So
mm,
what arises are memory images that belong to the external holographic field, which are clothed in personal recollections derived from something in the body. So the body, I think the body actually gives the logic of the dream its garments, its clothing, the appearance of the images. Yeah. So death is probably a similar kind of experience.
could dreaming be practiced for death?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Yeah. By way of dreams, I think you can find ways out. You can actually, so dreams are like a window or a portal through which you can enter alternative spaces um, besides the dream plane or the memory plane. Yeah.
Um, okay, there's more. I have more questions about this. Surely you are aware that whatever time is in dreaming, it's not the same thing as out here.
Time.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So like, and so we've already we've brought light into question. Something seems to illumine the context within which we experience dreaming. It probably isn't light, but it is also related to light. There does seem to be something resembling temporality in dreams. However, it is not structured the way it's structured on this side of that. conundrum.
Right. Right.
And there's also something like space, right? Like distance, but it's not the same thing either.
Hmm.
And so there's this fundamental triad. There's also something like identity, but it's not the same thing as identity over here by a long shot. It's much weirder. And I don't just mean personal identity. I mean the identity of uh, circumstances, entities, situations, objects, so forth in the dreamscape. They are not regular. They have, it seems to me, they have dimensions that are missing from most of our waking experience, usually. And they may have dimensions that are native specifically to the experience of dreaming. What are your thoughts?
I think you can see without light. You can perceive colors without light, which might be related to the dreamscape.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I mean, this is where I return to the Goethean theory of color and so on. But
Say more.
well, through the dream environment, you can exit your body in a certain sense, um, precisely because, as I mentioned, light is already structured by the time it enters your eyes. You can perceive external space without your eyes.
Mm-hmm. I've
How,
had such an experience a few times in a hypnagogic state. I've been able to see the room
yes, as have I.
without
Yeah.
with my eyes closed.
Hmm.
It's a very strange. It seems exactly like regular seeing at first appearance, but it isn't. It
Yeah.
has some other quality that I don't understand. But there is something I want. Okay, there's something I don't want to lose track of before we go too much farther down this little branch. I suspect that in your childhood behavior or activity, you might have been trying to escape the singularity of your world line.
Say a little more about that.
As you were speaking about, you were using the word escape in dreaming. You were using it about dreaming. You can escape your body, right? And when you talked about the problem of the history of an object and how you would relate with the profane version of the object, and what did you contrast with profanity? I don't think it was sacred. What did you contrast with it?
No, I called it sacred.
Oh, you did? Okay, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's almost as if it's really weird what's in my mind right now. It's almost as if you were physically doing what the dreaming mind does with strands of potential memory. It it
Right.
it it takes the sheath of the profane off and it preserves the essence or the by taking the sheath off, it the essence becomes preservable in futurial timelines or something like this. It's very difficult to say. Is it
Hmm.
making sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And there's this whole thing about the wheat in the Bible, right? That God, quote unquote, will like dispose of the chaff. You follow me?
I'm sorry. No, please go on.
Yeah, there's this whole thing in the Bible that's very look, I'm not trying to get us on biblical tangents here. I'm trying to say that there's this trope, this array of tropes that have to do with what is beautiful and is preserved, what is the true and the good and the beautiful and the originary and the memorial that is preserved, and that which is disposed of. right? And in these biblical passages, which vary throughout the Bible, it's a trope that recurs. It's often as if um, the metaphor of threshing wheat is sometimes used, right? You thresh the wheat to break the husks away, you preserve the kernels, those become bread, those become life. And so in listening to your description of your childhood activity and passion and obsession, I find something very compelling there that I've seen echoes of throughout our conversation today. And I'm not trying to collapse it into my explanation or even my perspective. I'm just trying to show that there are resonant echoes in your developmental path that are very profound and I think very beautiful and intellectually astonishing, insightful, just as if you were dropping a stone into a pool, right? And those ripples, those concentric ripples, are then, right? It's as if in your childhood, when you did that activity, you were dropping a trustworthy stone into a more trustworthy kind of water that would ripple out into the future of your developmental path. And also, I think you were trying to undamage something about the world line. And to do that, you might have had to get outside of it. What are your thoughts?
Right, I can see that. Yeah. When I was 9 years old, I injured my eye um, in a tree, which was pretty traumatic for me. Um, my left eye, and yeah, that was another formative aspect of my development, um, which I think catalyzed a lot of subsequent fixations um, or anxieties. Yeah. Um,
These formative experiences can be very personal and unique to each of us. And yet we each have these kinds of not just milestones, but like we have catastrophes. We have little apocalypses and so little deaths, yeah, that
yeah.
have a very profound effect on our psyche, that tends to persist unless what? Unless we undergo either some transformative rebirth where they are sloughed off, or perhaps something resembling really beautifully skillful therapy or something like this. Both of those things, do they make sense to you?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. I feel split down the middle.
I do too. I relate with that without going into detail about precisely how that's true. It's really weird to be a bilateral being, right? To have a front and a back and to have two sides that are like the wings of a butterfly in a way.
Right.
It's so weird. The surfaces of the body. Oh, that's the other thing. Oh, yeah, that I didn't want to lose track of. You said something like it was very important for you to feel your movement through space, your body's movement through space. Did you say something like that in your childhood?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. See, that's like I think that perception, which is not merely somatic, right? It's not merely visceral. It's almost as if you're going to forge the possibility of a new observational dimension. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
So as if you're going to forge a certain kind of a satellite that can observe with very specific concerns and from a really non-ordinary perspective the actions in time space that your body executes. Something like this. There are profound mysteries here that I look forward to the further pursuit of. I'm thinking that perhaps now might be a reasonable time to wind down for this session. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that sounds fine to me.
Is there anything that you'd like to share, ask, or say before we wrap up for today?
I just appreciate your time and your insights. I want to thank you for this opportunity.
I I can't express my joy enough. When our minds are together, UFOs are almost uninteresting. Like what we can become when we chase the light together is so beautiful and compelling and outside all of my ordinary experience that I'm just profoundly grateful for this, this opportunity to see and learn and grow together, man. I honor it, I respect it, and your path and your brilliant mind, and also your, the challenges and the struggles that you faced. So glad you're in the world. I'm so excited for other people to encounter us together, but also just your thought and your perspectives. Yeah, really, really happy about this.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Darren.
My pleasure, and we will do this again very soon. I wish you every beautiful thing in your life, and I look forward to our next conversation.